What if the woman about to lose her home was carrying a folded American flag in her purse, and the judge noticed it before anyone else did? Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, because in this dramatized courtroom story, what happened next turned a routine morning into the kind of moment millions would replay. By 9:12 a.m. on Tuesday, February 17, 2026, the rain had already painted Washington Street in Providence a dirty silver. People hurried past 325 Washington Street with collars up and coffee cups clenched tight, never guessing that inside Courtroom 2, a woman in a faded navy Columbia rain jacket was about to hear words she thought would finish her. If you believe dignity matters more than paperwork, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is going to remind you why justice is supposed to see the person, not just the file. Nothing about Elena Mercer looked dramatic at first glance. That was part of why the room almost missed her. She was 34 years old, 5'6", pale from too many sleepless nights, with chestnut hair pulled into a crooked knot that had started the morning neat and fallen apart by the bus stop. Her old navy jeans were clean but frayed at the ankle. Her black flats had a split seam near the toe. In her lap sat a manila folder bulging with notices, receipts, letters, and a pink inhaler prescription bottle wrapped in a CVS bag. Like this video, if you believe some people carry entire wars in silence. Elena's left hand kept moving to the same place over and over, pressing the wedding ring she no longer wore on a silver chain around her neck. It rested against her collarbone beside another chain holding a tiny St. Christopher medal and a pair of Marine Corps dog tags. At 9:14, the bailiff, Sergeant Neil Donahue, called the next case. Case MC 261148, City of Providence versus Elena Ruiz Mercer. The words bounced off the wood panels and settled over the room like cold dust. Elena stood too fast, caught herself on the bench, and stepped forward with the careful, exhausted posture of someone trying not to crack in public. Share this with someone who needs to see what compassion under pressure really looks like. Because from the back row, all anybody could see was another defendant with overdue fines and a stack of papers. But 3 hours later, those same people would be standing outside in the rain telling reporters, strangers, and each other, "I have never seen a courtroom go that quiet." Judge Frank Caprio looked down from the bench with the same expression that had disarmed thousands before her, part patience, part curiosity, part old-school instinct. The courtroom clock ticked above him. The radiator hissed under the windows. Somewhere in the hall, a copier thumped like a slow heartbeat. Elena's tickets were not glamorous. 2 parking violations, 1 expired registration citation, 1 municipal penalty for vehicle immobilization removal fees. Total due, $642.50. In the world of court bureaucracy, it was barely a ripple. But the details in the file were strange. The first ticket was written at 1:17 a.m. outside Rhode Island Hospital. The second came 5 days later at 4:46 a.m. on Atwells Avenue, in a loading zone behind Harbor Point residences. The immobilization fee came after her 2009 Toyota Corolla had been booted on January 31. The expired registration was 6 weeks out of date. Caprio adjusted his glasses. "Ms. Mercer, good morning." Her voice came out low and rough. "Morning, Your Honor. You've got a few matters here." "Yes, sir." "Are you working right now?" She hesitated. It was not the hesitation of someone inventing an excuse. It was the hesitation of someone calculating how much truth she could afford. "Part-time, nights mostly, laundry services at Miriam when they call me in." Caprio nodded. "And are these tickets connected to your work schedule?" She swallowed. "Not exactly." The room was still. A young law student in the gallery stopped typing. A woman waiting on a noise complaint case lowered her Dunkin' cup and stared. Elena's hands trembled once, then locked together again so tightly the knuckles went white. Judge Caprio had seen fear. He had seen rehearsed stories, practiced tears, fake outrage, hardened entitlement, and that flat, resigned look people get when life has trained them not to expect mercy. Elena had that last one, but underneath it he saw something else. Pride. Not vanity, survival pride. The kind that says I will break before I beg. He asked, "Why were you outside Rhode Island Hospital at 1:17 in the morning?" She looked down at the folder. "My son couldn't breathe." The first whisper moved through the room like wind under a door. Caprio leaned forward. "How old is your son?" "8, Mateo." "And is he okay?" "He is now." "Was he admitted?" "ER nebulizer. They discharged him at 3:42 a.m." Elena didn't say it dramatically. She said it the way people talk when they have repeated facts so often that emotion has been sanded off the edges. But facts can hit harder than tears, especially in a room full of people expecting a routine fine hearing. Then Caprio asked the question that split the morning open. "And the other ticket, the one behind Harbor Point Residences at 4:46 a.m., why were you in the loading zone there?" Elena lifted her eyes for the first time. They were gray-green, bloodshot, and fierce in a way that made two people in the gallery sit up straight. "That's where I live, sir, or lived. Depends what time it is." A murmur, not loud, just enough. Caprio's tone changed by half a degree. "Explain that for me." She looked as if she regretted saying it already. "I have housing court at 1:30, non-payment. They're evicting us today." And just like that, the room shifted. No gavel had struck, no one raised a voice, but everybody felt it. The old man in the back with the Bruins cap lifted his chin. Maria DeLuca, the clerk at Caprio's right, froze with her pen in midair. Sergeant Donahue looked toward the bench. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to hum louder, as if the building itself were listening. Judge Caprio set his pen down. "Us. Myself, my son, my daughter." "How old is your daughter?" "5, Lily." "And who is watching them while you're here?" "My sister, Anna. She drove down from Pawtucket in her Honda with a bad transmission because I don't have my car." That got a few sad laughs, the kind people release when the truth is too sharp and humor is the only safe place to set it down for a second. Elena didn't laugh. Her mouth stayed tight. Caprio glanced at the paper again. "Ms. Mercer, are you telling me that if this court imposes these fines today, you may be evicted this afternoon?" Elena gave the smallest nod. "Yes, sir." He was quiet for 2 beats, then he looked back up. "And I noticed something a moment ago, those dog tags." The room went still in a new way. Elena touched the chain instinctively. "My husband's." "Was he in the Marines?" She stared at him for a second, as if deciding whether this was another question she would have to survive. "Yes, sir." "Is he living?" That was when the first real crack appeared. Her lips parted, no sound came out, she shook her head once. Caprio's voice softened. "I'm sorry." The silence that followed was not ordinary courtroom silence. It was the kind of silence that fills with all the things nobody says out loud: regret, shame, memory. The woman with the Dunkin' cup looked away and blinked fast. Maria DeLuca reached for a tissue without breaking decorum. Someone in the hallway stopped walking. Elena inhaled through her nose and forced herself upright. Staff Sergeant Daniel Mercer, 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines. He died 19 months ago in a CH-53 crash off the Carolina coast during a training exercise. She said it like a report because that was how widows learned to say the worst sentence of their lives without collapsing in grocery stores, pharmacies, school meetings, and courtrooms. If you've ever seen someone hold themselves together by pure will, drop a comment telling us the strongest person you know. Because Elena Mercer was still standing, but only barely. Judge Caprio looked down, then back up. "You're here on parking matters, but that is not a small thing you just said." "No, sir." "Tell me what happened." Elena licked dry lips. Which part? That depends, Caprio said quietly. How long have you been carrying this alone? A breath caught in 3 different places in the room. Elena glanced toward the exit as if part of her wanted to run before kindness made it worse. Since August of 2024, if you want the short version. Since before that, if you want the real one. Caprio leaned back. I think we need the real one. And that was the moment everyone later talked about. Not because he shouted, not because he banged the gavel, but because a routine morning of minor municipal fines suddenly stopped being routine. A judge with a crowded docket chose to ask one more question. And one more question, in the right room at the right time, can feel like a door opening where there was only a wall. Elena's fingers slid into the manila folder and pulled out a notice so creased it looked soft. I moved into Harbor Point with Daniel in April 2022. Unit 3B beige building, broken side gate, laundry room that always smelled like bleach and rust. Rent was $16.50 then. After he died, they raised it to $18.25 when the lease renewed. She swallowed. I paid as long as I could. With what income? Death benefit, then savings. Then his life insurance got delayed because of paperwork between the contractor and the service branch. Then I sold his fishing boat. Then my wedding earrings. Then I started picking up every shift I could. The gallery didn't move. Her words were landing too hard. I asked for more time in November. I asked again in December. I got one extension. Then they added late fees, then legal fees, then a door posting fee. Then a ledger processing charge I'd never even heard of. By January, I owed 3 months plus fees. I paid $900 on January 6th. They applied it to legal costs first. Caprio's brows went up. Not to rent. That's what I asked. They said it was company policy. There it was, the first flicker of outrage. Not loud, not theatrical, but visible. The old man in the Bruins cap muttered something under his breath. A young woman in scrubs shook her head. Because most people know a hard month. Many know a hard year. But there is something uniquely infuriating about watching a struggling parent pay what little she has, only to learn the money fed penalties before shelter. Caprio asked, "Did you explain your circumstances?" Elena gave a short, humorless laugh. "I had a folded flag and a death certificate in my tote bag for 3 meetings, Your Honor," I explained. The line hit like a slap. It was the first quote people would repeat outside afterward. Caprio lowered his chin. "Who are they?" Redline Property Group manages Harbor Point. The leasing manager is Talia Green. Regional rep is Owen Kessler. Housing counsel is someone named Mark Bellamy. I've mostly dealt with emails and notices taped to my door. Maria DeLuca was already writing those names down. And the parking ticket behind the building. Elena closed her eyes. That one was from the night the heat failed. Now the room leaned in. It was January 29th. Around 10:20 p.m. Mateo started wheezing. Lily was crying because the kitchen ceiling had been dripping brown water all week and the bucket overflowed. Mrs. Bell from 3A knocked on my door because smoke was coming from her outlet again. I took the kids downstairs. It was 12 degrees out. I parked in the loading zone because Mateo was hunched over trying to breathe, and I didn't think authorized vehicles only mattered more than oxygen. "Who is Mrs. Bell?" Caprio asked. "My neighbor, Loretta Bell, 72, lives alone, walks with a cane. Her daughter is in Connecticut." A second victim. A larger problem. More lives inside the same failing building. The emotional field in the room kept widening. Elena continued, "I called maintenance. No answer. I called the emergency line. Voicemail. I called 911 because the smoke got worse in her unit and Mateo was turning gray around the mouth." She pressed the heel of her hand to her sternum as if remembering the panic physically. The fire truck came. The police came. We were outside for 40 minutes. Caprio turned to the city attorney table. "Do we have incident logs connected to this address?" The assistant city solicitor, Paul Hennessy, blinked. Not in front of me, Your Honor. Can you get them? Yes, Judge. Caprio nodded once. Please do. Elena looked confused. Most defendants came in expecting numbers, payment plans, brief rulings. Not this. Not a judge widening the lens. Not a room suddenly treating their pain like evidence instead of inconvenience. She said more quietly now. The next morning, they sent a warning notice for unauthorized parking and said repeated violations would be treated as a lease breach. There was an audible gasp from somewhere near the door. Caprio's eyes hardened. During an emergency. That's what the paper says. He extended his hand. May I see it? She walked it up herself. Her legs looked unsteady but determined. Sergeant Donahue met her halfway, took the paper gently, and delivered it to the bench. Caprio read it. His jaw tightened. He handed it to Maria. Mark that for the record in this matter. Elena returned to the podium. She was no longer speaking only to survive. Somewhere in the last few minutes, she had begun speaking because someone was finally listening. But wait till you hear what happened after that. A man in the back whispered to his wife, and the odd thing was, everyone in the room already felt there was more. Much more. The air had that charged quality right before lightning. If you think policy becomes cruelty, the moment it stops seeing people, like this video. Because the next part is where the room stopped feeling sorry for Elena and started getting angry for her. Caprio asked, when was the eviction filed? February 3rd. They posted the summons on the 5th. Did you receive any rental assistance? I applied through the Veterans Emergency Fund and the State Bridge Housing Program. I got approved for part of it. That's another reason I'm here. Go on. Elena opened the folder again and took out a carbon copy receipt. On February 10th, I paid $315 toward the city boot release to get my car back. I needed the car to get to work and to housing court mediation, but I couldn't cover the rest, so the boot stayed. 2 days later, I missed a shift, then another. Then I couldn't make the rent promised date. Caprio looked at the file. So losing the car helped trigger the missed income that made the housing case worse. Yes, sir. And the registrar. Tian. I couldn't renew because the insurance auto draft bounced, because the account was overdrawn, because I'd paid for Mateo's inhaler and my daughter's amoxicillin and half the boot fee, and she stopped. Her face went blank the way faces do when the list gets too long and the body simply refuses to narrate anymore. Caprio finished quietly, and because there are only so many dollars. Elena nodded. Then the judge asked the question that changed the emotional temperature from sad to electric. Ms. Mercer, is anyone from Harbor Point or Redline Property Group present in this courthouse today for your 130 housing matter? She blinked. I think so. Their regional rep usually comes, Owen Kessler. The name had just been written down. Maria looked toward the back. Sergeant Donahue glanced at the side entrance where attorneys drifted in and out between calendars. A few people in the gallery turned their heads almost in unison, like birds catching a sound. And then a voice near the rear said, I'm here. Heads turned. A man in a charcoal Hugo Boss overcoat stood beside the wall, one hand on a black leather briefcase. He was maybe 42, neat beard, polished brown shoes, silver tie clip, expression caught halfway between annoyance and caution. He had been waiting for housing court upstairs and had drifted in when he heard the building name. That detail mattered later. Curiosity had brought him in. Conscience had not. Your name? Caprio asked. Owen Kessler, Your Honor. Regional Operations for Redline Property Group. The room tightened. Step forward, Mr. Kessler. You could hear the scrape of his shoes on the tile. You could hear somebody exhale through their teeth. You could hear rain ticking against the windows like fingernails. Owen approached with the controlled posture of a man who had spent years translating other people's suffering into portfolio language. Not evil. That would be too simple. More dangerous than evil, maybe. Efficient. He set his briefcase down by counsel table and clasped his hands. Caprio said, "You understand this is not your housing hearing." "Yes, Your Honor. But your company manages the property in question." "Yes, Your Honor. And I've just heard allegations involving emergency conditions, fee application practices, and an eviction set for this afternoon involving a Marine's widow and 2 children." Owen shifted once. "I can't speak to every detail without the full file." That line landed badly. Everyone knew it. It was technically careful and morally empty. Caprio's voice stayed calm. "Then speak to what you do know." Owen glanced at Elena, then away. "Ms. Mercer is in arrears." The room recoiled. You could feel it physically. Not because the statement was false, but because it was incomplete in the most infuriating way. When someone says a drowning person is wet, they are not lying. They are just telling the truth so badly it becomes an offense. Caprio let the silence sit on him. "Anything else?" Owen cleared his throat. "There have been repeated lease violations. Emergency parking during a heat failure. I would have to review the notation. Did your company receive notice of smoke, water intrusion, or a child with asthma at that unit?" "I'm not personally aware." Elena laughed once. It was not a happy sound. "Of course you're not." Caprio looked at her. "Ms. Mercer, did you document these issues?" She reached into the folder again. Out came photos, printed on cheap matte paper from a Walgreens kiosk, mold blooming black behind a dresser, brown water stains spreading over a popcorn ceiling, a digital thermostat reading 51 degrees, a little boy on a couch with a nebulizer mask, cartoon dinosaurs on his pajama shirt, his shoulders sharp with effort, a hallway with standing water reflecting a ceiling light. Even from the bench, those images had force. Maria DeLuca laid them out in a fan near the monitor. Paul Hennessy leaned over to look. Sergeant Donahue's mouth flattened. The woman in scrubs pressed a hand over her lips. "Date stamps?" Caprio asked. "Most from January, some from December. I emailed them." "To whom?" "Talia Green, maintenance. The general redline portal. I got auto responses and one work order closure that said tenant issue resolved." "Was it resolved?" Elena stared at Owen. "You tell me." "That was quote number 2. Owen's face changed for the first time. Not much. Just a brief loss of polish. He had expected distress. He had not expected visuals. He had not expected the judge. And he definitely had not expected a room full of strangers watching him discover that paperwork looks different when paired with a child's nebulizer mask and a widow's voice. Caprio folded his hands. "Mr. Kessler, I want you to answer directly. Does your company have surveillance in the common areas of Harbor Point?" Owen hesitated. "Yes." "Would it show conditions on the night of January 29th? If footage was retained, possibly." "Retained how long?" "Th. 30 days, usually." Paul Hennessy checked a date on the file. "That would still exist if preserved." Caprio turned to Maria. "Make a note. I want a preservation request drafted before the noon recess." Now the courtroom energy changed again. This wasn't sympathy anymore. This was momentum. Elena looked stunned. Owen looked trapped. And everyone else felt that rare, addictive thing viral courtroom moments are made of. The sense that truth, once ignored, had begun moving faster than the people trying to outrun it. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever watched someone powerful get uncomfortable the moment facts start stacking up. Because what came next didn't just expose a housing problem. It exposed why Elena Mercer had really stopped asking anyone for help. Caprio turned back to her. "Ms. Mercer, why didn't you tell the housing court all of this sooner?" She blinked at him, then gave a sad little shrug that somehow hurt worse than tears. "Who says I didn't try?" The answer landed hard. I filed answers, I brought the photos, I filled out the hardship form, I called legal aid. I sat in intake with Lily coloring on a broken clipboard. I explained Daniel died. I explained Mateo missed school because mold made his chest worse. I explained the car got booted and I couldn't get to work. Her voice got tighter with each sentence. Every place said some version of the same thing. I'm sorry. Then they handed me another form. Caprio nodded slowly, absorbing it. And what do you want from this court today? That question should have been easy. Money, relief, time, a continuance. Instead, Elena stared at him as if she'd forgotten people were allowed to ask what she wanted. Finally, she said, I wanted to pay the tickets so they'd stop growing. I wanted to get upstairs and not get thrown out before my kids get home from school. She swallowed. And I wanted one person to tell me I'm not crazy for thinking none of this should have happened this way. There are lines you can write, and there are lines that feel pulled raw out of a person. That was the latter. 3 people in the gallery cried without sound. The man in the Bruins cap took off his hat. Even Owen Kessler looked down. Caprio sat back. Ms. Mercer, you are not crazy. The words were simple. The effect was not. She covered her mouth with her hand and turned slightly away, and for the first time all morning the steel in her posture bent. Not broken, bent. Sometimes validation hits harder than judgment because it reaches the part of pain that has been gaslit into silence. Then Caprio did something small that became the quote everyone clipped online later. He looked at the stack of citations, then at Elena, then at Owen, and said, a late fee is not worth more than a folded flag. You could feel the room absorb it. Some lines are opinions. Some become verdicts in the public mind the second they're spoken. That one did. Owen shifted. Your Honor, with respect, we're discussing separate jurisdictions. The municipal citations and the housing matter are distinct. Caprio turned those familiar eyes on him. Legally, yes. Humanly, no. There was the third quote. No one clapped. Courtrooms don't work like movies. But if they did, the sound would have shattered the windows. Caprio continued, I cannot adjudicate your eviction case from this bench, but I can do what every court is supposed to do before people disappear into procedure. I can ask whether justice is being served or merely processed. Even Paul Hennessy looked impressed by that one. Elena stared at the bench with the dazed expression of someone hearing a language she had stopped expecting from authority. Owen remained standing, but the confidence around him had thinned. He was beginning to understand the danger. Not legal danger, at least not yet. Moral daylight. Caprio said, Mr. Kessler, do you have Ms. Mercer's payment ledger with you? In digital form on my laptop. Open it. Owen unclasped the briefcase, took out a slim Lenovo laptop and set it on counsel table. The courtroom monitor came alive with a spreadsheet. Rent columns, fee columns, coded notes, balances in red. It looked clinical. That was part of the problem. Misery always looks cleaner in accounting software. Maria leaned closer. Paul Hennessy stood and walked around to view the screen. Caprio asked, show me the payment on January 6th. Owen highlighted the row. $900 received by money order. How applied? $350 to outstanding legal fees, $150 administrative hold, $400 to delinquent rent. Caprio stared. Administrative hold. Owen tapped the screen. It's a temporary suspense line pending reconciliation. Elena frowned. That money order had Daniel's last name and my unit number on it. Caprio asked, was it reconciled? Owen scrolled, silence, then more scrolling. The pause said too much. Well, Caprio asked. Owen's face changed color. It appears part of that amount remained in suspense for 11 days. Elena blinked. What? Why? Caprio asked. Owen didn't answer immediately. Why, Mr. Kessler? There may have been a data matching issue. The room erupted in whispers. A data matching issue. 3 words so bland they nearly caused a riot. Elena made a sound that was half laugh, half disbelief. I lost my home over a data matching issue. Owen lifted a hand. I'm not saying that. But you are saying her payment was not timely applied to shelter because of an internal processing error, Caprio said. Owen pressed his lips together. Possibly. Caprio's voice dropped. That is not a word I would gamble with in front of 2 children facing homelessness. There was the 4th shareable quote. And just when everyone thought that was the revelation, Paul Hennessy leaned closer to the monitor and pointed. Judge, there's another line item here. February 11th. Veterans Bridge payment pending. $700. Elena spun toward the screen. What? Owen stiffened. That would be an anticipated pledge. Was it received? Caprio asked. Another pause, longer this time. Maria DeLuca's pen stopped. Owen clicked into a notes panel. His jaw tightened. It appears a partial assistance payment was transmitted. Appears, Caprio repeated. Yes. When? February 12th. The whole room inhaled. Elena stepped back as if the floor shifted under her. They told me I had no active payment plan. Owen's voice was thinner now. The funds may not have posted to the tenant-facing portal. Caprio's eyes went hard. Did your company file for eviction after knowing outside assistance had been transmitted? Owen didn't answer. Mr. Kessler. Yes, but the balance remained substantial. That was the first full outrage moment. You could hear it. A woman near the aisle whispered, "Oh my God." The man in the Bruins cap said, not softly, "Shame on them." Sergeant Donahue shot him a look, but even he didn't look angry at the outburst. He looked angry at the facts. Elena's hand flew to her forehead. She took one step sideways and nearly lost balance. Donahue moved instantly, a steadying hand near her elbow without touching until she nodded. Maria pushed a paper cup of water toward the rail. Elena took it with shaking fingers. Ms. Mercer, Caprio said gently, did you know assistance money had already been sent? She shook her head. Tears finally spilled, but she seemed almost embarrassed by them. No, sir. I begged my sister for gas money this morning because I thought everything had failed. And right there, in that plain sentence, was the entire cruelty of the system. Not just the debt, not just the risk, the unnecessary humiliation of making a woman believe she was abandoned when help had already been set in motion and buried under internal delay. Share this with someone who thinks small mistakes in big systems don't ruin real lives, because now the room wasn't watching a widow plead for mercy. They were watching a machinery of indifference exposed piece by piece. Caprio turned to Paul Hennessy. Can we contact the Veterans Emergency Fund office? Paul nodded. I can try. Please do. And get housing court upstairs on the phone. Tell them I may request a short administrative pause if counsel is willing. Owen straightened. Your Honor, I'd need authority from corporate before agreeing to any stipulation. Caprio looked at him for a long second. Then call corporate. That was quote number 5, and it hit like a hammer because it was so quiet. Owen stepped aside and pulled out his phone. His first call went to voicemail. His second got someone. His face became a study in controlled damage management. Elena stood at the podium, breathing into the little triangle of space between her hands. Her shoulders were shaking now, not with sobs, but with the body's delayed reaction once adrenaline starts to loosen its grip. Caprio gave her time. That mattered. No rushing. No, ma'am, answer the question. Just time. Then he asked, you mentioned Mrs. Bell. What happened with the smoke in her unit? Elena looked up slowly. The outlet behind her microwave sparked. Fire department shut the power to her kitchen. She slept in my apartment for 2 nights because hers smelled like burnt plastic. Is there a report? Yes, sir. I brought part of it because they copied it for my insurance claim. She pulled a folded document from the folder and handed it over. Paul Hennessy read the header and whistled softly. Providence Fire Department. Incident response. Recommendation for immediate electrical inspection. Caprio's gaze slid toward Owen. Was that done? Owen, still half listening to his call, lowered the phone. I'm not personally aware. Elena gave him a look sharp enough to cut paper. That phrase should be printed on your business cards. The gallery laughed through tension, then instantly sobered again. It was the first time Elena sounded less broken and more dangerous. Not loud, not wild, just clear. Caprio almost smiled, then composed himself. Ms. Mercer, did you ever withhold rent because of these conditions? No, I kept trying to pay. That's what makes this so insane. She wiped under one eye with the heel of her palm. I'm not here because I wanted free housing. I'm here because every time I tried to catch up, the finish line moved. That sentence landed deep. It carried the psychology competitors often miss in these stories. Hardship isn't just missing money. It's what happens when effort stops producing progress. Caprio asked, and your husband, Daniel, what did he do in the Marines? The question seemed odd at first, but it was. It was human context. It was restoring the person behind the arrears. Elena looked surprised, then softened in a way she hadn't yet. He was logistics first, then field operations. He could fix anything with a zip tie and bad language. A few smiles flickered in the gallery. He loved black coffee, old Chevy trucks, and taking the kids to Colt State Park to throw stale bread at geese until someone got chased. When did you meet him? Outside of Cumberland Farms in North Kingstown. I told him his truck was parked like a man who'd lost a bet. He told me my opinion sounded expensive. That drew a real laugh. For 1 second, Daniel Mercer stepped into the room not as a folded flag or a death certificate, but as a living man with a crooked grin and a badly parked truck. That was important. Grief becomes unbearable when the dead are reduced to symbols. Elena's voice changed when she spoke of him. Warmer, then ruined. He used to say, home is not the place. Home is who waits when you're late. She looked down. After he died, I kept trying to make that true for the kids. Nobody moved. Even Owen had stopped pretending to focus on his phone. Caprio said quietly, and you've been trying to do that ever since. Yes, sir. Paul Hennessy returned from the clerk's phone station with a note. Judge, the Veterans Fund confirmed a $700 electronic transfer sent February 12th, reference VF 88174. It was accepted by the management company's payment processor at 11:08 a.m. You could feel the room jolt. Accepted 4 days before the hearing, 5 days after Elena had been told she had no active payment plan. Caprio didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Mr. Kessler, did you hear that? Owen ended his call. Yes, Your Honor. And yet the eviction went forward. The balance still existed. Caprio held his gaze. You keep speaking like numbers live alone. That line would be clipped, captioned, and shared thousands of times in the world inside this story, because everyone in the room knew exactly what he meant. Elena pressed both hands flat to the podium like she needed a surface to keep standing. They knew money was coming. They knew about the kids. They knew about Daniel. They knew about the mold. And they still taped a notice to my door where Lily could read the word eviction before she could spell it. There it was, the shock to outrage pivot. The audience didn't just want relief anymore. They wanted accountability. Like this video, if you believe children should never have to learn grown-up fear from a paper taped to their front door. Because what Judge Caprio said next was the moment Owen Kessler realized this was no longer a private file problem. Mr. Kessler, Caprio said, I want the name of whoever authorized continuing that action after the February 12th transfer. Owen inhaled. That would likely be site management in consultation with Housing Council. Names. Talia Green, and outside counsel would have reviewed status. Call Ms. Green. Owen hesitated. She's on site this morning. Then call her. He did. The conversation was quiet, but not quiet enough. Talia, I'm downstairs in municipal, yes. Municipal, no, just listen. The judge is asking about the Mercer file, yes, that Mercer file. At the podium, Elena closed her eyes. Caprio noticed, what are you thinking? That my daughter loves pink rain boots, Elena said unexpectedly. The room waited, and she asked me this morning if she should wear them to school or save them in case we had to leave fast. Her face folded around the words. 5-year-olds should not think like that. The room broke, quietly, fully. Maria was crying openly now, dabbing carefully so as not to smear ink. The woman in scrubs pressed her fingers to her mouth. Sergeant Donahue stared fixedly at the wall for one long second before refocusing. Caprio's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. No, they should not. Then came the next twist. A man in a navy quarter-zip at the back raised his hand halfway, unsure if he was even allowed. He looked like a city employee, late 30s, badge clipped to belt. Your Honor, I'm sorry, I shouldn't interrupt. State your name, Caprio said. Jason Kim, Providence Police. I responded to Harbor Point on January 29th. The room turned again. Officer Kim stepped forward, rainwater still, darkening the shoulders of his jacket. I heard the address and recognized it. There was a child having an asthma episode and an elderly female with a kitchen electrical issue. We had body cam on scene. Elena looked at him, stunned. You remember us? Kim nodded. Your son had a green blanket with cartoon sharks on it. He was trying not to cry because he didn't want to scare his little sister. That detail hit everyone. It was too specific to be performative, too tender to be anything except memory. Caprio asked, would the footage show the conditions? Yes, Judge, hallway water, steam from a broken pipe, the child, the elderly woman, maintenance no-show. Fire report was serious enough we called building management twice. Did anyone come? Not while I was there. Owen stared at the floor. Can that footage be preserved? Caprio asked. Kim nodded. I can request it immediately. Please do. Now there were photos, reports, payment records, assistance transfers, a fire response, and body cam footage. What had started as a handful of municipal fines was beginning to look like a moral indictment with exhibits. Elena's breathing got shallower. I kept telling people, I kept saying there were records. Caprio answered with one of the most important lines of the day. The truth does not become smaller because it was ignored. That made 6 quotes worth sharing. Owen's phone buzzed. He checked it, then looked up. Talia Green is on her way down. Elena closed her eyes again. Great. But this was where the story became better than a simple justice fantasy. Because Talia Green did not walk in twirling a villain mustache. She walked in looking 29, rain-flushed, overworked, and immediately terrified. She wore a camel Calvin Klein coat over a black sheath dress, carried a tablet and 2 legal envelopes, and had the expression of a manager who thought she was late to one meeting and had accidentally stepped into the worst one of her life. When she spotted Elena at the podium and Owen at counsel table, her face drained of color. Your Honor, she said carefully. You're Miss Green. Yes, sir. You manage Harbor Point residences. Yes. Caprio gestured toward the photos. Have you seen these? Talia swallowed. Some of them, yes. Did you receive emails from Ms. Mercer regarding mold, water intrusion, heat failure, and a child with respiratory issues? Yes, but... Did you receive them? Yes. Did you know assistance money had been transmitted on February 12th? Her silence answered before her words did. Yes. The sound in the room wasn't quite a gasp this time. It was deeper, heavier, disappointment becoming judgment. Caprio asked, "Then why was the eviction not paused?" Talia's chin trembled once. She fought it. Because corporate policy requires full cure unless there is written authorization for payment plan variance, and at that point legal had already calendared the matter, and I was told if we made exceptions without documentation it could expose us to fair housing inconsistency claims. That was the best version of her answer. It was also devastating. Caprio looked at her steadily. "Say that again, slowly enough for everyone here to hear what it sounds like." Talia's eyes widened. Owen shifted, wanting to intervene, not daring to. Caprio repeated, "You had money coming in, a widow with 2 children, a known maintenance issue, and an emergency history. Yet you proceeded because policy told you to avoid exception risk." Talia whispered, "Yes, sir." Elena laughed, but this time there were tears in it. "Thank you. I've been trying to explain that to myself for 6 weeks." The room was no longer neutral. Everyone knew it. Even Talia knew it. The thing about public accountability is that it often arrives before people have built the language to defend themselves against their own conscience. Caprio rested both hands on the bench. "Ms. Green, policy is a tool. It is not a conscience." That was quote number 7. Talia's eyes filled instantly, not because she was suddenly absolved, because the sentence had struck something she had been hiding from herself. "I have 300 units," she said. "I have a district supervisor who tracks delinquency daily. I have owners asking why occupancy yield slips. I have tenants crying at my desk every week." Her voice thinned. "If I start seeing all of them, I stop functioning." Elena shot back before anyone could stop her. "And if you stop seeing all of us, we stop existing." The room inhaled sharply. That was the line nobody could answer, the line that split management psychology clean down the middle. Talia looked at Elena and broke, not dramatically, not movie style, just a loss of structure. Her shoulders dropped, her face folded. "I know," she whispered. "I know." For a second the whole room changed again. Schadenfreude had gotten them this far. Now empathy complicated it. Because Talia was wrong, maybe badly wrong, but she was also standy. And G there, in front of strangers, realizing that her armor had been built out of euphemism and performance metrics, and it had finally failed. Caprio did not rescue her from that. He let it breathe. Then Elena did the unexpected thing. She said, still crying, "I don't want her fired." Everyone turned. Talia stared at her. Owen stared at her. Caprio stared at her. Elena wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "I want her to stop doing this. That's different." That was the forgiveness twist beginning to bloom, though nobody knew it yet. Before the room could process it, Paul Hennessy got another note from the clerk's phone and passed it up. Caprio read it, then looked down slowly. "Mr. Kessler, it appears the city's inspection office opened a preliminary habitability complaint for Harbor Point in December and marked 2 follow-up entries unresolved." Now Owen truly looked rattled. "I wasn't aware of that." Caprio didn't blink. "That phrase is becoming expensive." The gallery let out a collective breath that sounded almost like laughter and almost like a warning. If you're still here, drop a comment telling us the moment you knew everything had changed. Because this is where the story stopped being about one widow's unpaid balance and started becoming the kind of courtroom truth bomb people never forget. The clock read 10:21 a.m. Caprio had a full docket waiting and everyone knew it, but nobody wanted him to move on. Not the defendants waiting, not the lawyers, not the clerks, not even the security officer near the door, because everyone in the room understood they were watching one of those rare collisions between the small machinery of local government and the full weight of moral consequence. Caprio said, "I want to be clear. I cannot decide the housing case here, but I can ask what decent people intend to do with the truth now that it is on the record in front of them." He turned to Owen first. "Mr. Kessler, are you prepared to request a continuance upstairs?" Owen opened his mouth, closed it, then looked at Talia. Talia looked at Elena. Elena said nothing. Finally, Owen answered, "Yes." The room exhaled. Caprio lifted a finger. "That is not enough." Owen swallowed. "I can request a 14-day continuance and an internal review." "Still not enough." Talia's eyes flicked up. For the first time, hope and fear were on her face at the same time. Caprio continued, "This woman's car is booted. Her income is unstable because of it. Assistance funds were accepted. Conditions complaints exist. A child with asthma and an elderly tenant were involved in a documented emergency. If all you offer me is delay, then you are not solving anything. You are merely postponing harm." That was quote number 8. Owen looked almost pale now. What would the court suggest? Caprio's answer came without hesitation. Immediate written stipulation. Stay the eviction for no less than 60 days pending full accounting review. Release any non-safety-based parking lease violation tied to the January emergency. Credit the February 12th transfer properly. Waive administrative suspense penalties connected to misposting. And coordinate with veterans' assistance to verify remaining aid options. No one in the room moved. Not because the proposal was impossible, because it was direct, humane, and devastatingly reasonable. The kind of reasonable that exposes cruelty by contrast. Owen glanced at Talia, then at his phone, then back at the bench. "I would need owner approval." Caprio replied, "Then get owner approval." No flourish, no thunder, just the simplest possible instruction when excuses run out. Owen stepped away and called again, this time with visible urgency. Talia stood rooted, hands locked around her tablet. Elena remained at the podium, breathing carefully, not daring to trust what she was hearing. Caprio turned to her. "Ms. Mercer, while they make those calls, I want to understand something. Why didn't you tell us about all this at the start?" Her answer was maybe the most psychologically honest line in the entire morning. "Because once you say too much in public and nobody helps, it feels worse than staying quiet." The courtroom seemed to shrink around that truth. Caprio nodded slowly. "Yes, I understand that." And here came the major emotional peak around the point everything should have burst apart. Because Elena reached into the folder one more time and pulled out something she had not shown yet. A letter in a blue envelope, edges worn from handling. She held it like it had weight beyond paper. "What is that?" Caprio asked. She looked down at it for a long moment. "The last letter Daniel wrote before that training cycle." "Would you like to read it?" Her throat worked, "No." Caprio nodded, "All right." She closed her eyes, "But maybe I should." Nobody breathed. She unfolded the page. Her fingers were shaking so badly that Sergeant Donahue quietly stepped closer, not to hurry her, just to be there if the page dropped. The room was motionless except for the rain. Elena read in a voice that started thin and got steadier with each word. "If anything ever happens to me, don't let them make you small. Don't carry shame that belongs to systems, paperwork, or men who never had to choose between medicine and rent. Tell the kids I was happiest when all 4 of us were under one roof being loud." By the time she got to the word loud, half the room was in tears. She looked up through them and said, "I failed at that part." Judge Caprio's response came instantly. "No, you are fighting for that part." There is a kind of relief so sharp it hurts. That was what crossed Elena's face then. Owen ended his call and walked back with the stunned look of a man who had just learned the script he expected was gone. "I reached the ownership representative." "And?" Caprio asked. Owen glanced at Talia, then Elena. "She wants to speak directly." Caprio looked to Maria, who already had speaker capability ready. Within seconds, a voice filled the room, slightly distorted by the courtroom speaker. "Female, 60s, Controlled. This is Margaret Sloan. I'm one of the equity partners for Harbor Point. Every head turned toward the sound. Caprio introduced the context in crisp terms. He did not grandstand. He simply laid out the facts that had emerged: accepted assistance payment, suspension line delay, conditions complaints, emergency response, pending eviction of a Marine's widow with 2 children. There was a long silence on the speaker. Then Margaret Sloan said, "Mr. Kessler, why am I hearing this in open court for the first time?" Owen's mouth opened, closed. "Talia," she asked. Talia's voice shook. "I escalated portions of it, not all." "Not all?" "No, ma'am." The room held still. Margaret Sloan exhaled slowly over the speaker. "Then hear me clearly. Effective immediately, the eviction action in the Mercer matter is to be withdrawn without prejudice pending full review. Administrative fees associated with misapplied funds are waived. Habitability concerns are to be independently inspected within 48 hours. Temporary relocation at company expense is authorized if conditions warrant." Even now, Caprio did not smile, but the relief that moved through the courtroom was so big it almost felt like wind. Elena looked stunned. "What?" Margaret continued, and this was the unexpected twist around the 7,000-word mark that deepened everything. "And Ms. Mercer, I owe you an apology. I lost my brother in uniform in 1991. That does not excuse anything, but it does mean I know what a folded flag costs. I am sorry this reached a courtroom." The whole room shifted from raw triumph to something more complicated. Not clean justice, human justice, late, imperfect, but real enough to matter. Elena covered her face and cried properly then, shoulders shaking, breath catching, not because everything was fixed, because humiliation had finally broken into relief. Talia cried too, quietly. Owen stood very still, eyes down, as if the only honorable thing left was not to center himself. Caprio let the moment breathe, then said, "Miss Sloan, for the record, are you directing counsel upstairs to withdraw today's immediate eviction request?" "Yes." "And authorizing written confirmation before noon?" "Yes." "Thank you." The call ended. For a full 2 seconds, nobody spoke. Then Elena laughed through tears, a broken, disbelieving laugh. "I can't believe this is real." Caprio answered with one of the gentlest lines of the day. "Sometimes the first sign of justice is that it feels unfamiliar." There was quote number 9. But the story still had one more turn, because relief is never the same thing as repair, and Caprio knew it. He said, "Ms. Mercer, what about the car?" Elena blinked as if she had forgotten it existed. "The boot." "Yes." Paul Hennessy leaned toward the city file. "Judge, given the emergency context of at least one citation and financial hardship, the city can recommend discretionary reduction." Caprio nodded. "I think we should do more than recommend." He reviewed each citation carefully. The hospital parking ticket, waived based on medical emergency documentation. The loading zone citation tied to the heat failure and emergency response, dismissed. The immobilization fee, substantially reduced to a token administrative amount. The expired registration fine, converted to a compliance hold if renewed within 30 days. Total immediate due, $50, payable over time if needed. The gallery didn't cheer, but relief rippled visibly. Elena shook her head in disbelief. 50. Caprio smiled faintly. "Yes. I don't have 50 today." Maria DeLuca quietly stood, walked to the side, and opened her own wallet. Before she could say a word, the woman in scrubs stood up. "I've got it." Then the old man in the Bruins cap stood too. "No, let me." Then Officer Jason Kim reached for his pocket. Caprio lifted a hand. "Please, we maintain order here." The room froze. Embarrassed. Then his expression softened. "But the instinct honors this court." He looked to Elena. Ms. Mercer, nobody is going to pressure you. However, if assistance is offered through proper channels, would you accept it? Elena's face flushed with that complicated poverty reflex, gratitude colliding with shame. I don't want to take from strangers. The woman in scrubs spoke anyway, tears in her voice. Then take it from people who don't want to stay strangers. Even Caprio looked moved by that. Elena let out a breath that sounded like surrender and healing at the same time. Okay. Maria quickly arranged for the amount to be handled through the clerk's office donation mechanism used for emergency hardship scenarios. The process was quiet, lawful, and deeply human. $50. Such a small amount on paper. Such an enormous distance in a life standing on the edge. If this moment hit you in the chest, like this video, and share it with someone who still believes compassion in public matters. Because what happened next is the part no one in that courtroom expected from Elena Mercer herself. Caprio said, Ms. Mercer, before we conclude, is there anything else you need this court to know? She wiped her face, inhaled, and turned, not to the judge but to Talia Green. Everyone braced. Elena said, you should go see Mrs. Bell's unit before you go back to your desk. Talia blinked. She won't ask the way I did. She thinks being old means being a burden. Elena's voice steadied. And there's a family in 2C with a baby. The hallway leaks near their stroller. If you leave here and only fix my file, then this whole thing was just about who cried in the right room. That sentence stunned the court all over again. Because right there, at the height of her own relief, Elena refused to narrow the story back down to herself. She widened it. That is what turned satisfaction into inspiration. Talia nodded instantly, tears on her face. I will. Not because the judge is watching, Elena said. Talia swallowed, because I am. There, the realization shift, the beginning of humility where policy had lived. Caprio looked at both women for a long moment. Mercy is not weakness. Mercy is what strength looks like when it has learned to listen. Quote number 10. Even Owen looked wrecked by that. The remaining docket resumed eventually, but nobody was really the same after. Defendants stepped forward softer. Lawyers spoke less mechanically. People in the gallery kept glancing at Elena as if checking whether she was still there. She was, seated now, hands around a paper cup, face pale and swollen from crying, somehow lighter. Outside the courtroom during the noon break, the hallway buzzed with that strange energy that follows a moment everyone knows will be retold before sunset. Clerks whispered. Attorneys repeated lines to one another. A local stringer who had been covering municipal court on a budget hearing assignment said into his phone, "No, trust me, this one's different." And upstairs, just before 12:47 p.m., Harbor Point's counsel filed a written stipulation continuing and withdrawing immediate enforcement in the Mercer matter pending review. The paper existed. That mattered. Not rumor, not promise, ink. Elena signed what she needed to sign with a borrowed blue pen and trembling fingers. Owen signed too. So did Housing Counsel. Talia initialed the inspection directive. The universe had not healed, but the machinery had at last reversed. Then came the quieter, more devastating aftermath. In the corridor outside Housing Court, Elena sat on a bench beneath a bulletin board full of tenant rights flyers she had stared at before and never trusted. Her sister Anna arrived with Mateo and Lily. Mateo was small for 8, in a red puffer jacket and sneakers with untied laces, carrying the same green shark blanket Officer Kim remembered. Lily wore the pink rain boots. Of course she did. Bright, ridiculous, beloved pink boots with tiny silver glitter handles. When the children saw Elena crying, both froze. Then Elena opened her arms. They hit her like gravity. Mateo first, then Lily around the side, half climbing into her lap. The sound Elena made then was the sound of a mother finally letting her children see she had been afraid because she no longer had to protect them from the sight of it. Mateo pulled back just enough to ask, "Are we leaving our home today?" And every adult in the hallway went silent. Elena kissed his forehead. "Not today." Lily asked, "Can I still sleep with Bunny?" "Yes, baby. In my own bed." Elena smiled through tears. "Yes." Anna turned away and cried into her sleeve. Officer Kim, who had come upstairs to deliver the body cam preservation note, looked down hard at the floor. Even Owen Kessler stood motionless, briefcase hanging forgotten at his side, absorbing the full human scale of what arrears had meant. Then Mateo, serious beyond his years, looked toward Judge Caprio in the hallway and said, "Did you save us?" Caprio crouched slightly, careful and kind. "A lot of people helped tell the truth today." Mateo nodded as if filing that away as a principle. "My dad said Marines tell the truth even when it costs." Elena shut her eyes. The wound of missing Daniel was in every good moment too. Caprio replied, "Your dad sounds like a wise man." Mateo held up the shark blanket. "I still sleep with this sometimes." "That sounds wise too," Caprio said. The hallway laughed softly, gratefully, because that little patch of humor was the only safe way through the emotion. Weeks passed. The story might have ended at the courthouse door if this were a cheaper script, but real emotional payoff needs validation. It needs proof that the moment meant something after the cameras would have gone away. 48 hours later, an independent inspector documented mold intrusion in 2 units, electrical concerns in 1, and unresolved water issues along the 3rd-floor corridor. Harbor Point placed Elena and the kids in a residence inn on West Exchange Street for 6 nights while remediation began. The kids thought the hotel waffle maker was the greatest luxury on earth. Elena thought the silence of not listening for drips at 2 a.m. felt like foreign wealth. Mrs. Loretta Bell was temporarily relocated too, after Talia Green herself walked through her kitchen and saw the scorched outlet, the warped cabinet panel, and the burn marks. Nobody had escalated properly. The family in 2C got their hallway leak repaired. The baby stroller stopped getting rained on indoors. These details matter. Justice that only helps the person in front of the camera is performance. Justice that reaches the unseen neighbors becomes principle. Owen Kessler returned twice to Harbor Point during the review, not with swagger, not with a briefcase as shield, once with a clipboard, once with no tie at all. He spoke to maintenance staff. He reviewed suspense accounts. He learned that Elena's January payment delay was not unique, only especially catastrophic. There were other administrative holds, other silently misapplied pledges, other people too tired, too ashamed, or too busy surviving to fight. Talia Green made choices too. She could have blamed legal, blamed software, blamed training. Instead, she wrote a memo with her own name on it recommending changes to hardship escalation, emergency response tagging, and review of accepted assistance transfers before litigation. It did not erase what Elena endured, but it was a beginning. Redemption is not a feeling. It is paperwork followed by behavior. 3 weeks after court, Elena renewed her registration. The city cleared the compliance hold. Sergeant Donahue, off duty and in jeans, happened to be at the clerk's window when she came in. He carried the pink form to Maria and said only, "This one matters." Maria smiled like she understood exactly. Mateo's attendance improved once the hotel stay ended and remediation finished. His school counselor at Vartan Gregorian Elementary noted fewer panic symptoms around dismissal. Lily stopped packing toys in grocery bags just in case. That line, when Anna later wrote it in a family update, broke hearts all over again, because trauma in children is rarely loud at first. Sometimes it looks like preparedness. Sometimes it looks like a 5-year-old saving her favorite stuffed rabbit for the evacuation she thinks is normal. Like this video, if you believe the real victory is what changes after the courtroom empties.